In the early 20th century, a great war began in Europe. It was called the Great War, later known as World War I. Across the Atlantic Ocean, America watched. President Woodrow Wilson made a solemn promise. He wanted to keep the United States out of Europe's conflicts. The ocean itself felt like a massive, protective wall. Many Americans had family ties to the countries at war. They felt pulled in different directions, but most people believed this was not America's fight. The nation was focused on its own growth, its own dreams. Sending young American men to fight and die on distant European soil seemed unthinkable to many. Wilson even won re-election in 1916 with the powerful slogan, "He kept us out of war," but staying out of the war became harder and harder. German submarines called U-boats started sinking ships in the Atlantic. They did this without any warning. This was known as unrestricted submarine warfare. American ships were targeted and American lives were lost. In May 1915, a German U-boat sank the British passenger liner Lusitania. Over 1,000 people died, including more than 100 Americans. This terrible event shocked and angered the American public. Then, in early 1917, a secret message was intercepted. It was the Zimmermann telegram. Germany proposed an alliance with Mexico. If America joined the war against Germany, Germany wanted Mexico to attack the United States. This was the last straw. President Wilson, with a heavy heart, asked Congress to declare war in April 1917. He famously said, "The world must be made safe for democracy." Soon, American soldiers began their journey to Europe. They were part of the American Expeditionary Forces, or AEF. General John J. Pershing was their determined commander. He insisted that American troops fight together as a distinct American army, under American leadership. These soldiers were nicknamed doughboys. They were young, often fresh-faced and full of energy, though many lacked combat experience. Their arrival in France throughout 1917 and 1918 brought a much-needed boost to the tired Allied forces of Britain and France. They fought with courage in several key battles. The Battle of Belleau Wood demonstrated their fierce fighting spirit. The Meuse-Argonne offensive became their largest and deadliest engagement. The sheer number of American troops and their undeniable spirit helped to tip the scales of the war. The war effort was not confined to the battlefields of Europe. Back home, the entire nation mobilized. Ordinary Americans played a crucial role in supporting the soldiers. People bought Liberty bonds, lending money to the government to help pay for the immense costs of the war. Factories quickly shifted production. They stopped making everyday goods like automobiles and began manufacturing guns, ammunition, and other vital war supplies. Herbert Hoover, who would later become president, led the U.S. Food Administration. He encouraged families to conserve food through initiatives like Meatless Mondays and Wheatless Wednesdays. Powerful posters declared, "Food will win the war." Women stepped into new roles, taking jobs in factories and on farms, filling positions left by men who had gone to fight. Their contributions were essential. The entry of the United States into World War I had a profound impact on its outcome. The fresh American troops and vast industrial resources tipped the balance of power decisively. The German military leadership recognized that they could not withstand this new wave of manpower and material. President Wilson, hoping to shape the post-war world, presented his 14 points. This was his vision for a lasting peace. It called for an end to secret treaties, freedom of the seas, and the right of nations to determine their own future. The fighting finally stopped on November 11, 1918, an armistice day still remembered. However, the Treaty of Versailles, which officially ended the war, imposed harsh terms on defeated Germany. Many historians believe these punitive conditions sowed the seeds for future conflict. After the immense sacrifices of the Great War, many Americans longed for a return to simpler times. They were weary of Europe's complex problems and wars. A powerful sentiment of isolationism spread across the nation. People wanted America to focus on its own affairs, to avoid foreign entanglements. Reflecting this mood, the United States Senate voted against joining the League of Nations. This was President Wilson's own creation, an international organization designed to prevent future wars. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, brought a period of economic prosperity and cultural change. Then, the devastating Great Depression struck in the 1930s. Domestic concerns like unemployment and poverty naturally took precedence over distant foreign policy issues for most Americans. While America looked inward, dark clouds were gathering on the global horizon. In Europe, totalitarian regimes were on the rise. Benito Mussolini seized power in Italy, establishing a fascist dictatorship. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came to control, preaching a doctrine of racial supremacy and aggressive expansion. In Asia, the Empire of Japan embarked on a campaign of military conquest, invading China and seeking to dominate the Pacific. These aggressive powers openly defied international law and the fragile peace established after World War I. Britain and France, hoping to avoid another devastating war, pursued a policy of appeasement. They made concessions to Hitler, but this only emboldened him further. The world was slowly, inexorably, drifting towards another global catastrophe. President Franklin D. Roosevelt watched these developments with growing alarm. He understood the grave threat posed by these aggressive dictatorships to democracy and freedom everywhere. While respecting the isolationist mood at home, he began to subtly prepare the nation for potential involvement. Congress passed a series of neutrality acts in the 1930s, aimed at keeping America out of any future war. But as Nazi Germany conquered nation after nation in Europe, Roosevelt sought ways to aid the struggling allies, particularly Great Britain. The Lend-Lease Act, passed in March 1941, allowed the U.S. to supply vital war materials to countries fighting against aggression. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill also met to issue the Atlantic Charter, outlining their shared vision for a post-war world free of tyranny. Meanwhile, tensions with Japan escalated due to its continued expansion in Asia and its alignment with Germany and Italy. Everything changed on a quiet Sunday morning, December 7, 1941. Japanese carrier-based aircraft launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The assault was swift and devastating. Bombs and torpedoes rained down on the unsuspecting naval base. Battleships were sunk or crippled. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Tragically, more than 2,400 Americans lost their lives, and many more were wounded. The next day, a solemn President Roosevelt addressed Congress and the nation. He declared December 7th a date which will live in infamy. Congress overwhelmingly voted to declare war on Japan. A few days later, Germany and Italy, Japan's Axis partners, declared war on the United States. America was now fully engaged in the Second World War. The debate over isolationism was over. The attack on Pearl Harbor united the American people as never before. The nation mobilized for total war with incredible speed and determination. The home front became a vital arena of production and sacrifice. Factories that once made cars and appliances were converted to produce planes, tanks, ships, and guns at an unprecedented rate. America truly became the arsenal of democracy, supplying not only its own forces but also its allies. Millions of women entered the industrial workforce, taking on jobs previously held by men. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter symbolized their crucial contribution. To ensure enough resources for the military, goods like gasoline, sugar, meat, coffee, and tires were rationed. Citizens planted victory gardens to grow their own vegetables. Everyone was called upon to contribute, buying war bonds and collecting scrap materials. The Allies, including America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, adopted a Germany-first strategy. This meant that the primary military effort would be concentrated on defeating Nazi Germany and its European allies before turning the full force against Japan. American troops, known as GIs, fought in major campaigns across the globe. They began in North Africa, pushing back German and Italian forces. Then came the difficult and bloody campaign in Italy. The most famous operation in the European theater was D-Day, June 6, 1944. On that day, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, landing on the beaches of Normandy in German-occupied France. This marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's regime in Western Europe. American generals like Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, and the hard-charging George S. Patton became legendary figures. Simultaneously, the United States waged a vast and brutal war against Japan in the Pacific theater. This conflict was fought across immense ocean distances and on countless tropical islands. The American strategy was known as island hopping. U.S. forces under commanders like General Douglas MacArthur in the Army and Admiral Chester Nimitz in the Navy would bypass heavily fortified Japanese islands and instead seize strategically important, less defended islands. These captured islands then served as bases for further advances. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was a crucial turning point, crippling the Japanese Navy. Fierce and costly battles followed on islands like Guadalcanal, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The fighting was often savage against a Japanese enemy determined to fight to the last man. The war in Europe finally drew to a close in the spring of 1945. Allied armies, with Americans pushing from the west and Soviet forces advancing from the east, closed in on Germany. Adolf Hitler died in his bunker in Berlin. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. This day became known as VE Day, for Victory in Europe. Wild celebrations erupted in cities across the Allied world. There was immense relief that the long and brutal struggle against Nazism was over. However, this joy was tempered by the horrifying discoveries made as Allied troops liberated Nazi concentration and extermination camps. The full, unimaginable scale of the Holocaust became clear to a shocked world. With Germany defeated, the Allies could now concentrate all their formidable power on defeating Japan. The war in the Pacific continued for several more months. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had died in April 1945, and Vice President Harry S. Truman became president. He faced an agonizing decision. Military planners estimated that an invasion of the Japanese home islands would result in catastrophic casualties for both American and Japanese forces. A top-secret American program, the Manhattan Project, had successfully developed a new, terrifyingly powerful weapon, the atomic bomb. In August 1945, President Truman authorized its use. On August 6, an American B-29 bomber dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The destruction was unprecedented. Faced with this overwhelming power and the Soviet Union's declaration of war, Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan. World War II was finally over. America's role on the world stage was fundamentally transformed by its involvement in these two devastating global conflicts. Before World War I, the United States, while a growing industrial power, had largely remained aloof from international political affairs. By the end of World War II, America stood as one of the world's two dominant superpowers, alongside the Soviet Union. Its economic might was unparalleled, and its military strength was formidable. The United States took a leading role in establishing the United Nations, an international organization dedicated to maintaining peace and security. Through initiatives like the Marshall Plan, America provided billions of dollars to help rebuild war-torn Europe. A new era of American global leadership and international engagement had decisively begun. The legacy of the World Wars continues to shape America to this day. The generation of Americans who fought in World War II, and those who supported the war effort on the home front, are often referred to as the greatest generation. Their sacrifices ensured the defeat of fascism and imperialism. The wars also brought about significant social changes within the United States. Women had proven their capabilities in traditionally male roles, contributing to a growing movement for equal rights. African Americans, who served with distinction in segregated units, returned home with a renewed determination to fight for civil rights and an end to racial discrimination. America learned the hard lesson that events far beyond its shores could profoundly impact its own security and prosperity. It embraced a new and often challenging position of global responsibility.